engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious leaders, innovators, and people who are ready for the next level and beyond.
I'm really excited for this session of Pure Reinvention. We're here today with Mickey Hirten. Mickey is the president of the board of directors of the Michigan Press Association. Professionally, Mickey has experience as the executive editor of many medium-sized newspapers, as well as being the senior editor of a very large newspaper. Mickey has an MBA from Loyola, as well as an undergrad in economics. Mickey, currently in his role as the president of the board of directors, has a very unique role in this process of reinvention that we're excited to introduce to you today. Welcome, Mickey.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Mickey, you and I have talked many times about how important it is that businesses stay relevant in both the for-profit as well as the not-for-profit sector. And one of the ways in which we've recognized that businesses need to move forward is having some reason. Can you explain to me how you've been able to recognize what the role of disruption has been in helping an organization have a focal point for why we need to change?
Well, I think like so many organizations, associations aren't really much different from any other sort of business. And if it's going along reasonably well, you allow it to happen. You may be innovative, but tend to be, I think, more maintaining. What happens in the association world right now, certainly from my perspective, is that it hasn't responded as quickly to the changes that are roiling businesses as it needs to. And it finds itself all of a sudden with fewer members, declining revenues, all sorts of issues and problems. Now, depending on how serious those issues are, you will take either moderate action, no action, or in some cases, dramatic action. The disruptive event in my world is when the revenues are down, and you can see, if you look out ahead, you can say, if we don't take some kind of action quickly, we may not exist. Now, that's a very sobering realization and a very important realization, because if you have your passion for your organization, you want it to continue because you feel it's doing well. And the threat of not existing, to me, whether it's financial, membership, cultural, demographic, however you define it, it's that threat that prompts you to take the action.
So talk a little bit about how you make sure, as the president of the board of directors, your fellow directors understand that same passion that you're talking about for sustainability.
Well, I think if you're lucky, your board has that passion in various degrees. What it probably doesn't have is a deep understanding. It could, but boards are boards. Let's be honest. They do this, it's either honorific or it's, succession. There's some reason people are on there. I think my job as the president or as a leader, let me put it that way, a leader is better, is to recognize the problem and convey it to my board. They won't understand it as deeply as I can if I delve into it. And my job then, it becomes a very leadership job. I first have to lead them to understand that there's a problem and that they need to address it because it's in their interest. And secondly, to help determine a course that gives them the faith that, yes, we can make this change and we have the people in place to make it happen.
So the president becomes a very important transition point to bring the board to a focus of understanding as to what's really happening. And in reality, the president may have a much deeper understanding of what's really happening as opposed to the other board members. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And so much of it does pivot off the president because he's been elected by his peers. And I know from sitting in the gallery that, yeah, do whatever you want. I'm here, yeah, aye, nay, yeah, what's for lunch?
Sure.
I got to say. The president, though, has the respect and the obligation. He's got the power. And a board will generally follow his direction. And if he believes it and sells it, they charge him with helping manage their interests and needs. So you have to use that, and you have the opportunity. You have the power to do it.
So in this opportunity, people make choices, and one of the choices it's obvious that you've made based on watching you react to this question of disruption, and now I want to ask you about ownership, is you, as the president, have taken ownership of the current set of circumstances within your association. However, I think what you're really saying is it's the president's role to initially take ownership with the association and then bring the board of directors along with you. Is that correct?
I would say that's true, yeah.
And so how did you begin to really take ownership of the current set of circumstances within the association, your association, which got disrupted? And then secondly, how are you beginning to build that followership that you as the leader need to have to bring your directors to support whatever decisions need to be made?
My own personal experience in the newspaper industry has been so highly disrupted over the last 10 or 15 years that I have a lot of experience with it. I worked with Gannett, which, for its many flaws, has been one of the more successful companies managing this change. So I have a lot of experience professionally from we were here, now we're going to be here, now we're going to be here, now we're going to be here. There was lots of change that happened. So when it was a very quick study for me. I mean, it only took me probably about 10 minutes to go, oh my God, we are in deep trouble. And to see that, I mean, you just look at the trends. As soon as you focus on that, you go, we've got big issues here. I also, because of my background and personality and temperament, began to think, how do we change all of this? And so a plan, I mean, it's sort of, I've had this skill as an editor. I mean, you tell me your idea as a reporter, and I see the end product. And it's not everybody can do this, or does it. I could see how it's going to appear in the paper. I almost see the headline. I have that, which is a really key skill to be, if you're going to be editing. I sort of apply that same thing to here. I look at the problem and say, we are in trouble, and I begin to sort of synthesize solutions. I mean, because I know the organization very well, and it's very quickly, so things that you've sort of let slide. A good example is communication. You'd say, if we're going to be successful in the future, does our monthly newsletter have anything is that going to help us at all? And you very quickly go, no, this is ridiculous. This is not the kind of communication that will work into the future. Is our narrow membership band, we deal with about 300 newspapers. Is that enough to sustain us into the future? These are very intuitive sorts of things. So anyway, I think what you're asking is, you see the problem and you begin to formulate ideas. You say, well, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, especially if you're innovative. And you begin to fashion that idea. Now you become the owner. Now you recognize that my job is to really sort of begin to synthesize these ideas and get people to follow them. Now, some of this will depend on the quality and size of your professional staff. We have a very thin staff here by design, and that probably puts more obligation onto board ownership than if you had, an executive director and a vice president for this and a senior director for that, as some large associations do. So it's probably on a small group you have to take a far greater ownership stake than you would at another, and probably more hands-on ownership than the more traditional, well, here's the direction we need to go, come up with a plan.
So from an ownership standpoint, I'm really hearing you say that the president in their very unique position has to take the perspective of not being a typical board member, but being the leader and being able to make the connection with the business. So they're functioning in a completely different role, in a completely different space than what the other board members are, and probably very different than what past presidents have had to function, because in most cases, presidents preside over board meetings only. They do not, or have not in the past, taken on such an active role as an active participant in the change process.
And that's a really important issue, and it's a real challenge. Most presidents are presidents of their organizations because they started 6 or 7 years ago as the secretary, then they became treasurer. It's not a meritocracy. Whereas in a business, presumably the president is there, the leader is there, because they are particularly good at leading and innovating and managing the affairs of the business. In an association, it's far more honorific. So that becomes a real challenge. Do you have, as the association, the right kind of leadership at the right time to make a transition? And maybe you do, but maybe the vice president who's coming up is just the vice president because he was the treasurer the year before. And so that's a real challenge for an organization. And I don't know how you deal with that over time. You have to look into your own roster and see who's there and what can they do and do they have the power, and it's a challenge.
Yes, and the likelihood is that as an organization, when you look at the board of directors as a key asset in their role, you have to make a very conscious effort to make sure you are grooming the kind of leaders that can participate in the manner in which you're describing, as opposed to the more honorary type of activity in which it's more of a passive listen as opposed to take ownership of and really have some sort of an end result that you're after. I mean, that's a very key understanding it, as it's in this process of reinvention, the board of directors role has a very different type of expectation.
Right, but understand the problem with that is the disruption is happening quickly, and your lines of succession are well established. So for a board, what board, a small collegial board, is going to go in and say, well, let's reevaluate this. The next in line is pretty good, but the guy in back, I don't know, he doesn't seem to have a lot of fire, so we're going to kick him out. This isn't going to happen. I mean, the reality is, over time it might, but even now, you're saying, okay, well, in year 10, we're really going to have this guy's a dynamic or she's a dynamic manager or innovator. We'll get her. I don't know how you deal with that. I mean, I think some of it is hope. You hope you have the right people on deck when you need the right kind of change.
Well, there's a reality, certainly, to what you have today, and then I think there's also this reality that as you move forward, you have to move into the recognition of where your opportunity for change exists and where your opportunity to manage, right, your board of directors, rather than just this honorary type of move-up.
Right. I'm just saying that's a big ship to turn for an organization.
But I think you would agree that in this process of reinvention, the amount of change that needs to take place is huge at both the operational level as well as the political level within the responsibilities of the board, which makes me want to now shift to the next conversation, which is you have been very interested in having a dialogue around how future members are attracted to the association. So how does a business grow, get more customers, build a more robust, financially robust business model? And one of the ways you have been communicating to myself and to the board of directors has been that we have to move away from an obligation model of membership to a model of consumption, where we have products and services that people are willing to pay for and consume as a value to membership. Can you talk about why that is such an important item for you to help the association move to this thought process of consumption rather than obligation?
Well, I mean, I think it's so fundamental. I mean, it's the essential business model. I mean, you don't succeed as an entity unless you provide something that someone is willing to pay for. Now, in an association, I mean, we've sort of had the luxury in the press association for like a century and a half of simply succeeding because we were here. And that's not unusual. I mean, there was a good reason for that, and it worked. In the future, though, that doesn't happen. And we've been interesting, too, because we have a very limited number of newspapers. They're big and they're powerful and they're expansive. They cover the state. But you still have 300, maybe 350, which isn't very much. That's a pretty small base. But what we haven't been able to do and haven't thought about is thinking about the broader mission. We've thought about newspapers rather than consumers or producers of news and information. And what we need to think about is who are the people who are engaged in our mission. Our mission is support of the First Amendment. Our mission is producing news and information. It's a watchdog role. And when you do that, you have a universe of people. So in our case, we have certainly the traditional membership, but there are other people now, especially in a fractured media world, who produce news, produce information, and they do it out there. They're out there on their own. Can we harvest them as part of our membership? We have college students who are looking for jobs when they graduate. Integrating them into the mission and the benefits of a press association is not, if nothing else, it's a great resume item, but there's practical ways to attract them. And there are lots of structures. You can then begin to see who are likely people to support that we can join together with in our mission. And that's where you find tiers. Now, when you look at these tiers, you quickly realize that not all of them want the same things. The students, for example, may simply want to be able to put on their resume, I have been a member of the Michigan Press Association, and maybe get some video training about that. Or maybe just a directory of who are all of the, here's a directory of all of the editors of all of the newspapers and websites in the state that you get as part of your membership here, and here's who you contact to look for a job. You may look at the traditional members and they want more training, they want advertising training. You look at this. Now, I think thinking of the tiers to me is pretty easy. I can make as many pancakes as we need. The challenge, I think, is finding really meaningful value that you attach to those memberships and selling that value and maintaining that value. And that is very different. I can put a beautifully, tiered structure of membership together by the end of the day. Does it work? Will people pay for it? The people pay for it is the trick. And there's a lot. Then now you're into a business model that requires business plans. You have to be able to administer it. You have to be able to innovate on it. You have to be able to deliver it, sustain it. That's where the real rub becomes, in my view.
Right, but what you're beginning to describe, Mickey, which is exciting to all of us who are listening to this, is there's a universe of opportunity.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And then as you market segment those opportunities, you start to put business plans and focuses and resources towards the development of those. So that makes me ask this very fundamental question. In many cases, some of our past business models have been to centralize in one place and have the membership come to that place, that the central hub is where the activity is, and you expect members or customers to come to you. But I'm beginning to believe that you understand that it's more about how the association learns to connect, go outside of the business and connect to the customer rather than the other way around. Can you expand on, as your experience in the newspaper industry has started to teach us, you can't just produce a newspaper that you think is fundamentally correct. You have to produce a newspaper that is fundamentally correct and that people will buy.
Yeah, I think what you're really talking about is a relationship, and you can do it lots of different ways. Clearly, face-to-face is a great way. But in our world today, look what I'm talking to podcast here. That's a way of communicating and providing information. Video offers us tremendous opportunities, both inventoried videos and live videos. So when we have our convention, why shouldn't that be telestreamed live in some way to people, or inventoried very quickly so you can get it at the end of the day? This is just the way we communicate. Social media is a way to communicate. And so in an organization like a Michigan Press Association, which has been rather traditional, we don't use any of these methods. And point of fact, businesses don't use these methods very well. But there's real opportunities when you begin to think about it to communicate in lots of different ways. And again, some of it is just, it's very tactile. We have our meets here in Lansing. Why don't we have a board meeting in the northern part of the state to raise the flag there, and at that point promote ourselves and sell our services? We are salespeople, Life is sales in one way or another. And the associations have to be much, much, much more adept at selling what they have and determining, does it work? Can it be improved? Does it fit our mission? And going out and making and maintaining that sale. And very different for associations.
I think that's very different for many businesses.
Yeah.
Those who are struggling to achieve success and those who have some degree of success. And of course, that success is ever changing. It's completely dependent upon the consumer and their ability to part with their money, which is the greatest indicator of whether they support your business or not.
Yeah, it's that part with the money, because it's so easy to have the business plan that says, well, we're going to make $50,000 on this. Well, you're going to have to take that $50,000 from somebody. It's going somewhere now, and you have to convince them that you got to send it my way, and I think that's really hard.
Well, it is, and this is where I want to come back around to your role as the president, your role as the leader within the board of directors. Almost everything that you've talked about means that the business or the association has to create movement. It's absolutely imperative that we create new movement from the kind of movement we had in the past to whatever the kind of movement needs to be in the future to have the kind of economic response that you're describing. So how, in your role as the president, do you support the value of movement to get the business to learn how to accomplish new and different things?
I think as the president of the board, people recognize the challenges and the need. I think they do. My job is to ensure that there is a plan, that we have a direction that advances the needs they're only beginning to think about now, and just to create that sense of trust that in my world, there's nobody who doesn't know deep down that their business is changing rapidly and that their association, when they think about it, has real challenges. They want it to be better. My role is to help convince them that we have a plan to make it better, and if you have better ideas, and to accommodate it, to manage the political waves, to, though, insist that we move on in a quick and assertive way. And if you have the respect of your board and you have the ideas to sell it, fine. But again, it's sort of back to the sales. As the leader, I've got to sell it. And you sell it by the early things we talked about. We believe in it. We have ideas that we think are appropriate. We understand the challenges. It's just a leadership challenge for me, but it's one that it has to be done.
Well, and it has to be done well, because really what you're saying in all of those things is at the end, the other board members have to have confidence in you that the things that you are talking about, the way that you're talking about them, the vision that you and the organization are starting to spell out in this future direction, they have to believe that we can accomplish that. And if they can make that connection to whatever the message is that the president and the board and the organization have identified, then they have the confidence to be able to follow along with that, because they've been able to attach to it.
Well, even more, they have the ability. They're willing to enhance it. We have a limited number of great ideas, but collectively they have a lot. So if we can engage them in the process, where are your ideas? Can you sell this to other people? It becomes a tree. It starts at the top with the plan and the idea. The board is the secondary tier. They get on board, they get excited. Their job is now, you go out and sell some of this. It's almost like it's like a Ponzi scheme, but without the jail at the end of it. But it's a tiered. It's a structure. So getting them involved, and also being realistic that this isn't going to happen tomorrow. This is a process we are going through. We didn't get here. It took us 150 years to get here. We're not going to fix this tomorrow. There will be investment. There will be mistakes. There will be successes. We will learn from this. But above all of this, don't lose track, we must move and we must change. And we must do it as quickly as we can. And this is where we're going. And I think, and if you have a recalcitrant board, then some of it is just insisting, well, this is how it's going to be. Right. Yeah, I understand. I hear what you're saying. Right, you're right. We'll deal with it as best we can, but we must change or move. And that's. I
think it's very exciting to listen to you communicate some of these things, and I think for our listeners, they've gotten a great deal of opportunity to get into your head as the role of the president, and really see and really give them some ideas on how in this ever-changing world, the board of directors has a very important next step role. You are beginning to model that for others to understand what that really is, and I think that gives even our listeners the confidence that that the behaviors are starting to emerge. It's beginning to be understood. It's got some very fundamental properties to it, and then you have to apply those. For example, you taught us about making sure you use the disruption as a positive, not a negative. That there's this whole space around ownership that allows ownership to not just be operational, but ownership at the political level, with the president being an active participant in understanding and owning what the transition and change is that needs to take place.
And of course, that will vary depending on the organization and lots of factors.
And the depth of organization,
right.
Sure. But in many cases, that transition point between the executive and the president is an important transition, because in any process of change, the organization may or may not understand it, the board may or may not understand it, but in the end, everyone has to be on board for there to be a successful end result of reinvention. And it was very interesting to listen to you talk about how you could see that the role of the president and the confidence and the ownership that individual took allowed the others board members to become comfortable with then their role.
Yeah.
And their role then they were able to discover their role because you had accepted that initial responsibility. I think these are all the kinds of roles and changes that future boards are going to need to adapt to. You talked about it was going to take time. And in some of these reinvention strategies, the time is not necessarily always an element that's in your favor, that you have to sometimes make changes, understanding you're going to be a little disruptive on the time schedule, but it's economically absolutely imperative that you do that. But doing that in the confidence that the universe is opportunity for you.
Oh, yeah.
That if you have a restriction, it's only a restriction you've placed on yourself, that you as the president of the board see a universe rather than a very small, finite set of opportunities.
In the case of the Michigan Press Association, which has been, again, I can just say rather insular, I mean, it has the opportunity to be one of the most important organizations in the state if it certainly chooses to. And for a board member, that ought to be exciting, you know? For new members, that ought to be empowering. I mean, it's just, there's opportunity there.
Well, the association has been very fortunate to have you in a leadership role to be able to start to champion some of these things. And again, I think it just even speaks to the importance of having both internal and external champions. It doesn't take a lot of them, but it is an extremely important role. Mickey, I want to thank you for the time that you've shared this morning. This has been a very inspiring, even for me, who's very familiar with reinvention. Even I'm excited to go back out and start to help others with the reinvention projects. I know that you have made a very big difference here, and I want to thank you for your investment of time as others are beginning to learn what you've been able to share with us today.
Well, thank you. It was enjoyable for me also.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new episodes are available by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.